Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to Men Redefining Manhood, a movement for fathers and men ready to rewrite what it means to be men. Let's redefine manhood together. I'm Ruben.
My name is Jose, and the topic for today that we're going to bring to you guys is men, money, and worth. How being a provider becomes your identity, and how it damages intimacy in relationships. So let's go ahead and talk about it, Ruben. I think that this is a very worthwhile topic. Definitely a topic that affects a lot of men and a lot of families. I know that in our culture, in the Latino culture, we as men, we're accustomed to being providers. Making sure that there's always a roof, food on the table, and so forth. And that may cause us to lose our identity as individuals and as who we are as people, and take on that role and that identity of being a provider. But what about the other areas of you as a person?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I know. I thought of that right away when we got into that topic, and even prior to us starting this um, episode, I was saying myself, for me, it was a struggle because um, I focused a lot on just being a provider in the early stages of my adulthood and my relationship with my wife. And she went to school, got educated, and started making more money than me. And I felt some kind of way about it. Being in our culture, it's so predominant that the man is kind of the lead, the man is the provider.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of an offset. Um, and it made me feel, you know, kind of a little less worthy. It made me feel like a less, a little bit less of a man, I guess,
And
towards it.
yeah, and
And
the influence and the pressure that comes from our culture and family, right?
mm-hmm,
Because the expectation is that you should be in charge
yeah,
of your household. You should be the provider. And when the roles are reversed,
mm-hmm,
there's questions being asked, right?
yeah,
Like, what's going on? How come you're not carrying your weight and so
mm-hmm,
forth? When
yeah,
in reality, there's plans. Maybe you're going to school. Maybe you're finding your way in your career, finding out, where you're going to go with life to support your family, and it's an agreement that you and your spouse have had, right?
yeah.
I mean, I assume.
And that's the thing. We had an agreement where she was gonna go do her schooling and finish what she has to do, get her education, and pursue her long term goal. Um, but even us having that conversation, I was still feeling some kind of way. And I remember having some conversations with her about it, how it, kind of made me feel and stuff. And she's like, "My money is your money. Like, remember when we got married, we're one. Like,
Yeah.
there's no I make more money than you. You make no. Like, our money goes into a pot and it goes to our bills and our lifestyle and stuff like that. So don't let it bother you. But it is, our culture is so strong in it where I think I've talked about it in a previous podcast too. I remember being out of work for almost a year too. It was difficult, not being able to provide, and it caused a lot of struggle for me.
Mm-hmm.
My own identity was struggling because of it, and it was like, am I not enough? Does she look at me different? Am I less of a man because I'm not providing? And it was a struggle. It makes me think a lot back on it, and it caused a lot of relationship problems with my wife because of it. And it was like, no, I got to get out of this thought process. We're both providing for the end of what we're trying to do
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. Um, so yeah, it was a huge struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I know that I've experienced, like in my profession of working with people and so forth, right, as a therapist, is that uh, I hear it often, right, where uh, the man the man assumes that because he goes to work, brings the money home, and provides for the family, that he's fulfilling his responsibilities as a father and as a husband. When in reality, they're very separate, right? And so it creates an issue in intimacy, right? Because the man may become, or the father may become very, very, very settled and just, accustomed to the routine of going to work, bringing home the money, and expecting that everything else is going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? When in reality, like part of your identity may be to provide, but you also have other responsibilities that are part of your identity, right? To fulfill your fatherhood responsibilities, to fulfill your responsibilities as a husband, right?
Yeah.
And so they're three separate compartments, and none fulfill the other. They all have to be fulfilled independently. So I've seen that be an issue. And so, for example, right, I've asked the question before, like, oh, so what do you guys do what do you do as a couple? And one of the responses that I get is, oh, I tell my wife, to in my family, let's go out, and they go out and they have a good time, and okay, but what do you do as a couple, not as a family, right? Which is very separate, right? One thing is going out and nurturing your relationship with your spouse. The other thing is going out as a family, right, and attending to your children and to your family and as a whole, right, creating that experience. So there could be some sort of a mix up there as well, but I think it all comes down from that misunderstanding and the identity, right, of the man, that, oh, well, you know what, the money's there, we go out, we do things, and I've done my part. Let them choose whatever they want or whatever, and that's what it is, right?
I provided, no me preguntas nada.
Yeah.
Like, leave it alone.
Yeah, you're and that's not the case,
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because me and my wife actually just had this conversation yesterday. We both finished our day kind of early. We were both able to go pick up our daughter early from school. And just the joy in seeing her react like, Mom, Dad, you guys are both here. Like, oh, dang,
yeah,
this
that's
is cool.
Amazing.
And the conversation started because my wife was like, wow, we're beyond blessed to be able to do this.
Absolutely.
She's like, because we recently had a conversation about my father, and she's like, yeah. She's like, I was telling her about the topic that we were going to discuss, and she's like, yeah, how does that make you feel? That, think about it. Your dad used to get up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning and wouldn't get home till 6-7 o'clock at night. What was the dynamic like? And I was like, we couldn't really be loud. We kind of had a tiptoe and stuff, because obviously, for the respect of him, like, he's going out there working his butt off to just be a provider.
Right.
And
that was his identity.
Right. My identity is completely different. I'm helping provide to our household with my wife, but I'm also being an active role as a father for not only my son that's in college, but also my young daughter that is in kindergarten.
Yeah.
And spending time and having these conversations with my wife too has further supported us having a good relationship. Something that I really didn't really talk to her about, my emotions and all that stuff, on how I feel about everything. So I've really been, I talk about it a lot in here, I really reflect a lot about my upbringing and who I'm becoming, who my new identity is, because my identity has changed from when I started to be a father to where I am now. And I really look at everything, like, so much has changed, and the new norm of being a man is completely different. And there's a guy that I watch, motivational speaker, and he says we can't just be successful in one area of our life. Like, I can't just be a provider. My goal in life is not only just to provide to my family, but to be there emotionally for my family, to be a better husband, to be a better man overall. I'm flawed. I make a lot of mistakes. I'm human. I still get angry. I still act, goofy and stuff like that.
We all do.
Yeah.
Like we all, we're human.
But I'm able to see it more often now. I try to catch it a lot quicker, and I think that has to do with really looking at my identity and saying I don't just have to be a provider. There's so many other roles that I could play that is gonna better make me feel good.
Yeah.
And
you know what's nice about that is that there's a mutual understanding, right? Between like you and your spouse, right? And like between myself and my spouse. We also have that mutual understanding, right? That, we're a team. We work together, right? We help each other out. Decisions are made. They're made by both of us. The communication's on par. We're always communicating about day-to-day decisions and everything else. Sure, there's certain decisions that she makes on her own and me on my own, in our own independent time and so forth, right? But anything that affects like the family system, that affects our relationship, our children, like there's a lot of dialogue that goes into it, right? Because it's it should be a team approach, to making those types of decisions, right? I myself personally, I don't want to feel, and I want my wife to feel like she's being left out, or that my kids don't have a say so, especially if it's something that's involving them, right? So that's important, But one of the things that I've also noticed occurs in certain relationships, and men have a difficult time with, is being able to share the identity of providers, right? And breadwinners. And what I mean by that is that sometimes men struggle with accepting that and allowing their partner into that space. And instead what happens is there's a power struggle over who should be, right, the provider, or one should be above or superior to the other, and it kills intimacy. It really does kill intimacy. And I'll give you a perfect example, right? Like people wanting to have their own bank accounts, right? And wanting to split everything 50-50, which is fine, right? If that's what works, that's what works, right? But then what happens is it creates problems when trust becomes a question. Why aren't we sharing these things? What is it that's going on behind the scenes? We're both providing, we're both offering, we're both contributing. So why don't we have an account where we both share and everything's transparent, right? And that results in a lot of questioning, and right, and it affects the relationship. It really does. And that's just my opinion, but I see it all the time, like people questioning, like, well, how come I'm not in your bank account? So one person or the other feels rejected, right? Doesn't feel like they're 100% accepted into the relationship. And I think it's all because, oftentimes it's more the man wanting to hold on to that identity of provider, right? By being able to say like, oh, well, no, like I'm the one in control of, the finances, or I'm the one, and it kills intimacy. It creates a disconnect in the relationship.
Yeah, that was me. That was me. I'm very flawed at that. I was always the one trying to organize everything, and I've noticed now I've stepped back from that, and looking at the reality of stuff and saying, hey, I focused so much on being the provider and taking care of everything, and I wasn't doing good. So now I've allowed my wife to kind of take over the financial aspect, and I'm like, you're better at doing this, because obviously what we were doing was not working.
And I call my wife the treasurer.
Yeah.
And she's the one in charge of, like the money goes into her account, and she understands where it needs to go, right? And we share responsibilities. I also, there's certain things that I pay as well, right? But the trust is there, right? You're not fearing that your partner or your spouse is going to do something out of bounds, right? Because the communication and the healthy and the relationship is healthy.
Yeah. We have our set. You pay this, you're paying that. So she set that expectation for us, and it's helped a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think just over our finances too. I'm like, okay, this looks a lot different.
Yeah.
I don't feel the weight of it anymore. Like, too, that was a big factor for me too, because it was like I'm looking at everything and I'm like, oh my god, how are we gonna do all this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I see her, and she's like, we got this. We're getting this in, and I'm like, how are we doing that? And she's like, we both do fairly good. So like, we're doing what we can. Both of our kids are in private school. We own our home.
Mm-hmm.
We have some nice vehicles. We bought our son a car. Like everything is good. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And she's just, taking care of and managing it. I have to use that. She's our treasurer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's what it requires, right? It requires to be willing to share that responsibility, which is something that we've talked about in the past, right?
Yeah.
Sharing the leadership role, right?
Yeah.
Allowing your spouse, your significant other, into the decision-making process, and a lot of what revolves around your family and your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And like they always say, right? Two minds think better than one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when you do that, you allow for another person to look at things from a different perspective. And when the trust is there, you don't question the decision. Rather, you trust that the decision that the other partner brings into the process is a healthy decision, and it's for the better of the family, of the relationship, right? And I think my opinion is that as a result of that, then you start to see your finances grow. You start to see how things flow, right? And it's just it strengthens the relationship too, right? It builds intimacy.
Well, I thank her because a lot of it, because when I think about it too, I think back, even that time that I wasn't working. I think because she told me, like, don't worry about it, focus on your school, focus on what you got to do, everything's like our finances are good, don't worry about it. And it gave me that opportunity to build my relationship with my son, because in the early stages, like, I was still kind of trying to figure everything out, how to be a father.
Sure.
But during that time frame, it caused me to not only have an amazing bond with my son, but also during that time frame, our daughter was little. She was a newborn, so I got to be the stay-at-home dad, which was cool, because I got to see all the milestones with her as little, and then not only that, building that relationship with my son, and to this day, like yesterday, he FaceTimed me out of the blue just to tell me, "Hey, Dad, I'm at this barbecue place getting food," and I'm like, it makes me feel so good, because I never had that relationship with my father. I couldn't just call him out of the blue, "Hey, Dad, this is what I'm doing," He's gonna be like, "Get that." He's like, "What's wrong with you?" So it when I sit back and I look at it, and it's like, dang, like I'm thankful because of that, because I may have not been the leader in financing for it, but I strived in another area, and it caused me to really look at life differently. And I don't need to just be the provider. Like, we could provide together, but I can also be the dad and have those conversations. And we had some interesting conversations with my son, and sometimes my wife would like, "You overshare a little bit," and I'm like, "No, I want him to feel comfortable to come to me and have these conversations, because eventually some of this stuff's gonna happen. He's gonna have a wife and kids and all that stuff. I want him to know through my experiences on what he can change and take from, and become his own identity as a man himself. So
and so when a man is so focused on being a provider, he loses touch with experiences such as what you mentioned, right? Loses touch with connecting with his kids, loses touch with connecting with his spouse, right? And so what happens, right? For example, in situations where from one day to another, that identity disappears, like, you're used to just being the provider, and all of a sudden, right, you get laid off, or your company downsizes or something, and now you don't have that, right? And you're not used to having or being, have exercising other parts of your identity, right? The father role or the husband role. Now all of a sudden, right, like your whole world just comes crumbling down. And I think, I may be wrong, but I think that this is where we start to see men trying to exert power and control and become abusive as a way to try to recapture that identity of being the man, right? Through other means, right?
Yo soy el hombre.
Because now they don't have the finances, they're not contributing, so they still want to feel like they're in control. They want to feel like, they're still present, and again, it shoots down intimacy, it creates problems, So yeah, it's there's a lot in this area, of being a provider, maintaining that identity, but also ensuring that you practice your other parts of your identity and who you are as a person, right? And that's important, to keep that abreast and in the forefront. So yeah, hopefully this was something that was helpful to you guys, something to ponder on and to think about and ask yourselves, where are you at? What's your identity? Do you consider yourself just to be a provider? Do you consider yourself to be a well-rounded individual, right? That feeds, your relationships and provides and also offers, like you mentioned, that space for emotional connection and so forth. And if not, maybe there's some areas where some areas to start to work on, because I think they're important,
And like I said, we started this podcast because we want to. Me ultimately, I want to teach this as well. You know what I mean? So if there's guys out there that, we do have an IG page. If you ever have questions, and even on the YouTube, if you guys want to ask questions, feel free to. I try to be an open book as much as I can, and my ultimate takeaway from this is just to be there for each other and help learn. Like, I could talk about how hard it was for me and what I did to, try to overcome some of these situations as well. So feel free to reach out. This is what we're here for. We want this to be a movement to better support each other as men.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's important. I think there's a lot of takeaways that I think you and I have talked about, outside of the podcast, in areas where we have grown, and I think, and we'll be sharing some of those as well over time. But yeah, it's great, to feel like you can share that role as a provider, and to feel like not only are you seen as a provider, but that you're respected as a husband, you're respected as a father, right? And that you can, and it's because you attend to those areas of who you are, and what you offer.
And are willing to be vulnerable to say, hey, you know what? For me, it was the big one, that vulnerability on saying, hey, I'm not doing really good in this area. I'm okay with you helping kind of take over and lead it.
Or asking questions, right? Even asking for feedback from your kids, like, hey, if at any given time something, that I say or that is not, let me know,
we've had those conversations. Me and Ruben have those conversations.
Because, we want to build intimacy, right? We want to build that connection with our kids and our spouses, and, and we don't want, the identity of a provider to be the wedge that creates that separation, not at all, so. Well, anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining in and for listening to this podcast. Hopefully it was helpful once again, and like Ruben mentioned, right, visit our IG page or check out our podcast on YouTube. We're going to be planning to also incorporate the podcast into other platforms as well, right? I think it's going to be something good so that they're more accessible, and so that people in other platforms can also see them. So yeah, stay tuned, and we look forward to putting out the next podcast. All right, guys, so stay tuned.
All right.
Thank you guys for joining in. Have a good one.